Hey guys, Space Marine 658 here. Thank you for joining me for another devlog for Starlight Brigade, my 3D space combat simulator built in Unreal Engine 5. I'm joining you today, April 5th, after just having finished up an hour working in my game. I'm really happy to be finishing up today what feels like a massive undertaking. Last month, before my birthday, I was wrestling with whether or not to go in and actually overhaul my game. It's been a few years in the making due to school and work, and I just didn't want to delay new features any longer. I knew that if I didn't overhaul all of my poorly written systems, I'd get further into technical debt. So I set myself a harsh 1 month timeline to fully move over all existing systems. While there are a few minor missing ones, I can definitely say it was a success. My spaghetti code that was spread all over my player pawn is now neatly packaged into components, structs, and events. My UI is now event driven instead of bindings. My engineers are no longer static enums, but instead detailed modifier driven structs that react to their damage systems correctly. So, as you might immediately notice, there is a bit of a UI difference. There's a bit of a UI overhaul going on in general. This is mostly to handle a couple things. One, we're handling event-driven UI in a slightly different way, using gameplay tags and attribute systems to kind of make sure that we're actually handling it properly. Before, a lot of it was just sort of thrown together to make sure that, as I was learning the systems, that it just worked. So now it's going to look a little better. It's going to continue to change and grow as the game does as well. As you can see here, this has had a massive overhaul. This is sort of the ship systems view. I haven't put the title up here yet because I'm still, uncertain of what I'm going to call this. Essentially, this is the view where you can get sort of an overview of the different compartments in a ship. As well as you can kind of see here, there's a little bit of information, for example, when you hover over them, that kind of tell you about each section of the ship. And going forward, they'll also include things like, crew manifests for each portion of the ship, just based off of, knowns. We also have our fuel power ratio here returning with the description about what it actually does. Then you can see here, we also have the coloration that changes as you increase the fuel power ratio. We also have, this is still placeholder text up here at the top because I'm still kind of working on the engineering teams. We have the engineering teams as well as the size of those teams. And then down below, we have where they're currently stationed. So if they're stationed in the engineering base, this is sort of like a off the map kind of location. It's sort of a safe place for them to be. It's where they can just, be prepared for any eventualities, but they're not actually at any specific location. But then you can actually station them somewhere, or you can move them somewhere that's damaged or destroyed and have them go ahead and repair it. So let's actually take a look at what that looks like. So we go ahead and just damage the front of our ship. As you can see here, we took some damage to the forward compartment and the forward engine. If you take enough damage to the forward engine, you'll actually be unable to you'll be unable to use that forward-facing engine. So if you need to brake in that direction, you'll actually have to turn the ship around and brake the hard way. But let's actually go ahead and send our crews out to those different compartments. As you can see here, now we've got the one engineering team. They just fixed up the forward engine, and since they're done and this compartment is still taking a while, we can actually move them to here and they'll work together as a team, and that'll kind of speed up the process. Now, of course, I can move them there, but if I move them away while they're mid repairing, that can slow down the repair. In fact, you're actually kind of punished for moving them apart once you've made them work together. Just as a sort of way to say, like, it can cause things to get very disorganized when you separate teams like that. And so that's one of the downsides of splitting engineering teams. As you see here, I've now got them stationed here, so they're actually stationed ready for the next round of damage. And let's go take a look at our, you see here, now they start repairing immediately. Yeah, this one, I've noticed sometimes that kind of flickers. That's a bug that I figured out the issue with, and that should be fixed in the next one. Essentially, it's just the UI not rendering out the spacing correctly, so when it refreshes, it kind of clears everything. So that'll be easy enough to fix. So let's go ahead and, yeah, see, it doesn't always correctly display the engineering teams. But I know what's wrong there, so that'll be fixed. In the ship section here, so this is the ship's crew. This is where we actually store some information about the crew and then what modifiers they actually give the ship itself. So for example, here we have the helmsman, who those are the ones who are taking damage in that initial example there. As you can see here, they've lost some crewmen. And so they are starting to have issues with input delay. So essentially these helmsmen have a helm delay. So when you have full team of helmsmen, it has no delay whatsoever. But as you start losing them, you'll start slowly getting delayed. Now I do have a cap on that delay just because it feels kind of bad if it's too high. And that'll probably get tweaked as the game goes on, as we kind of figure out, what's an appropriate level where players feel like they're being punished, but also it's not taking away full player control. And then we also have the navigators here. They provide the modifier of turning speed. So essentially, these guys help kind of guide the ship in the direction it needs to go, so help turn it. While the helmsmen actually handle the, how quickly those orders get input, these are the guys that are actually calculating, how to turn, what engines to fire. So they're doing the hard, space science to actually make the ship turn. And so if they start taking damage, the ship will start, turning at a slower and slower rate. There's a minimum for that, so that way, if it gets too low, the ship will still be able to turn, but you may not be doing it as efficiently, so it's not going to be as quick, and so on and so forth. And additional teams will have those as I expand on that. And so that is a lot of what's been going on, is sort of taking the existing features and reworking them in ways that, are more sensible and just better practice in general, just making sure that they work how they should be. Before, a lot of these systems here, which could be used amongst different ships, were all built into one single event graph, and now my event graph is significantly smaller. I'm down to basically the bare minimum, and even this stuff could be moved inside of things like, for example, this docking part could be actually moved inside of the docking component when I eventually make sure that this is working properly. That's probably where that will end up. First, I want to create the UI and everything and make sure that I have it how I want it. And then a lot of this could be moved into the actual docking component, so that way I can have AI ships also use docking components when and if they need to. And as you can see here, so there's just a lot less going on in the player controller while all still, doing the same things. And that's just to make things sort of a little bit more modular, a little bit more compartmentalized, so that if I need to make a big change to, say, how the engineers work, I can do so without it really affecting the main player controller itself. And so I've kind of built out all these different systems. So, you've got public and private functions here that kind of help me access the systems within this without, opening up too much of the floodgates. But yeah. And so I built out an attribute system, a ship status system, which handles things, for example, where a compartment gets hit with a missile. Let's say it's a missile that is HE, and so that compartment, let's say, is weak to that, because we actually track that in these ship components. So for example here, actually a better example. Yeah, here we go. So for example, in this forward compartment, it has a status possible effect of reactor damaged. And it also has a weakness to, this was AP rounds. So it is armored against Grazer and HE, but AP rounds can penetrate it. So what will happen is basically these rounds do less damage and are less likely to actually cause damage to this component in a way that'll create these status effects. And so what will end up happening is basically, right now it's set to a status of 100, but that's not actually what it'll be. Instead, it's going to be something closer to like, maybe 5-10%. And then what will happen is it'll then also look at, what actually caused the damage. So if the damage was a AP round, since it's weaker to it, that's when that full 15% will come in. But let's say it's, Grazer HE, then the odds are really low. And so I will At that point, I'm going to decide whether or not I want to make it just significantly lower chance, or if I'll just make it not possible at all. This is sort of one of the design decisions I'm still in the process of making. But yeah, and so that is basically the entire component system, and that all ties into every single other system in the ship. For example, the ship status, that's where the reactor damage goes. Gameplay tags, when the actual reactor gets damaged, the gameplay tag goes here. When the front compartment gets damaged, the gameplay tag goes here to alert the other systems in the game that this has taken damage. The attributes here, this is actually where things like the ship's superstructure actually has a value. So if the first compartment takes damage, the ship's superstructure takes damage as well. And while you can repair that front compartment, you're not going to necessarily get back the full superstructure's health. You know, there will be some residual damage. Now, how much that is will just depend on what kind of damage was taken. For example, AP damage isn't going to do a whole lot of, superstructure damage. You're mostly just going to get like little pot shot holes, versus HE and grazers tend to leave bigger holes. They do less penetrative damage, but they do larger, point of impact damage. And so that's where you're going to get a lot more of the balance coming in, where like the heavily armored compartments can balance damage versus things like HE and Grazer, but they're going to be more likely to take damage from AP versus, lighter armored compartments, way less likely to take damage from something like an AP round, but HE and Grazer will basically just shred them. Yeah, and so within that, we've also got our damage control compartment. This is where our engineering team live, and they handle repairing the different parts of the ship. But yeah, that is most of what I've been doing this last almost a month now today. Sort of just reworking all these systems, and the benefit now is that now that these are all built into very modular systems, one, this means the player ships can be fully, fleshed out and given all of the different pieces that it needs. But then on top of that, any of the actual AI ships that use the same systems can also have just literally the components slapped onto them and a little information filled out. One last thing I want to talk about before we end our video today is actually audio. So this is sort of the first iteration. I've been working with Metasounds. It's Unreal Engine's audio component system. So what I've gone ahead and done is actually gone in and created a Metasound. And the cool thing is that this actually, the noise and the visual, the particles all play with this power ratio due to the systems now being interconnected. If I speed up, so as you see here, the particles are moving faster, they're brighter, as well as the audio is slightly higher pitched. It is warbling a little more, so it's got a bit of a pitch shift there going on. And so that all is part of those systems that I created. And that'll kind of help me sort of build out this game a little bit more modularly. But yeah, that's it for today. If you have any questions or anything else you'd like to see or know about the game, definitely let me know. But otherwise, good luck, good hunting.